Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another fabulously informative Rocket Matter webinar. We're really excited for today's topic, which is covering a lot of different aspects of something that lawyers sometimes may not know much about, but it's definitely important to them, and that is cybersecurity. Now, before I go ahead and introduce our host, what I would like to do is do a few little housekeeping items. If you look on your screen, you should have something that says Go to Webinar Control Panel, and there's a section that says Questions. And what I'd like anybody to do, any brave soul, is type something in that question box and let me know that you can see the screen and that you can hear me. So if anybody, oh, hi. Okay, so thank you very much. We can, I verify that we have, okay, perfect. I can hear, I can see. Very good. Okay, perfect. So another item of housekeeping for those of you who have joined us promptly at 2 o'clock. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive the webinar recording tomorrow afternoon as well as the slides. And you're going to be receiving that via your email. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. Okay, perfect. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Rick Duman, who is our host for today. Just to give you a little background on Rick or Richard, he's the Vice President of Sales at Secnap Network Security, and they provide security solutions for businesses. And he's got over 2 decades of experience in technology and communications, things like cybersecurity, telecommunications. So when it comes to cybersecurity, this is coming straight from the horse's mouth. We've got an expert here, people. So without further ado, I'd love to pass it on to Rick Duman of Secnap. Rick, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good afternoon, Lisa, and thank you for having Secnap on to present. So we'll kick things off. A little housekeeping of my own, if you don't mind, and that is to cover the objectives. What we hope to come across for today's presentation, which is definitely relevant for legal and any industry these days and age. And that is the cybersecurity landscape. How has it changed? What does it look like today? A lot of discussion about that, both within the press, the media, in general, because it has evolved. Why are law firms being targeted by cyber criminals? Not to pick on law firms, but all companies, all industries are being targeted. But why should law firms be paying close attention? And then finally, what can law firms do to protect their practice? Things proactively and during and after a potential breach or incident. So jumping into the first topic, the cybersecurity landscape of today, the cost of a breach, and there's a lot of discussion of this in the media, and what makes an incident, a breach, a ransomware, any event dealing with cybersecurity, what makes it so expensive, and why has it changed over the years? So first off, they've always been expensive to recover from a breach. It is a disaster, not unlike any natural disaster that you might need to take a look at for your business, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, but it comes without notice. Also, the recovery from a breach involves a lot of data forensics. You have reputation risk, business loss. So there's a lot of components to the breach itself and the postmortem of the breach, which makes it expensive. One of the last statistics that I've looked at from the cost for a breach, the average cost is in the neighborhood of 3.86 million. And they've actually broken this down to the cost per record. So if you're holding personal information, that is about $148 per record based on statistics and past research. And the cost is going to be going up at some stage because there is more regulation coming in. So privacy being regulated. You may have already heard of GDPR or other privacy laws that have made the news. And being in the legal space yourself, many on this call may already see that coming down, including the California Protection Act, some additional regulation from New York and other states following suit. So that's only going to make things more expensive as it regards to not just the protecting yourselves from a breach, but the notification requirements that come as a result of having been breached. There's a point in here referring to the overwhelming alert volume. The alert volume is something that we're seeing in the cybersecurity space. It's the tidal wave of logs and alerts that we need to review to try to root out and uncover some of these security breaches because they do go undetected. This is a very, this topic has changed quite significantly over the number of the years because we have more and more devices within our work environment. You bring your own device, you have your IoT, you've got smart TVs. So there's all new avenues for a hacker to penetrate your network and gain access. And any one of these devices typically generates some form of a log or a security log, which in most proper security postures and environments are being reviewed or should be reviewed. The challenge with the industry today is it's overwhelming. Most of these logs cannot be reviewed by without some artificial intelligence or some added expertise, which again is another industry trend. The last piece here on the multi-layer approach, there are a lot of frameworks, a lot of architectures that you may have heard of. There's your SANS, your CIS, your NIST. Just about every framework or every architecture is asking to put more than one layer of protection because the assumption is at one point or another, a technology or a solution that you have in place is going to be compromised. Something is going to get through. That's why you need second and possibly a third level of protection to help uncover and root out a breach or a ransomware. So next, in terms of the landscape, we look at a criminal playbook, the cyber criminal playbook. This graph is used quite often in the security industry. There's another similar version called an intrusion kill chain. This basically looks at the path that a hacker is going to take, because what happens is they typically will follow the same basic pattern. They're going to gain access into your environment. They're going to move throughout, and then they're just going to try to achieve their objective. And this is an important thing for folks to really understand. There are a lot of steps potentially that they're going to take. Some items such as social engineering, the research. At the end of the day, their objective is going to dictate which steps they take to get from the beginning stages out to completing their objectives at the very end. And moving on to the next slide, and I'm going to go back and forth on these so you can kind of see and compare and contrast. This next slide actually refers to the data breach report. This report comes out annually. It's available online, and it talks about the trends of the reported breaches that come out. When I say trends, I mean how quickly do the compromises occur, and how quickly can they get to their goal, and then finally the detection. How quickly are they discovered? So these two slides actually come hand in hand. So when you come back to this first slide, you got to look at the hacker's perspective as far as what are their objectives. Are they simply trying to drop ransomware and collect the ransom? Are they looking to do some cryptojacking? So that's another popular trend these days with regards to taking advantage of your CPU resources to do their own crypto mining. And then finally, are they trying to get after your data? So the objective that they have is going to dictate what path they take. And this last piece, exfiltration, so their ability to get to the final stages and pull it out and pull data out. Well, when you look at the breach investigation report, 40%, this was in 2018, 40% of the reported breaches, they were able to get to that data within minutes. And with our security operations center, we've seen in the instance of 1 to 2 minutes. So there is a big problem throughout with regards to how quickly can they access that data, and then how long are they sitting within that network before they're actually discovered. And one of the examples that we mentioned in here for all of you, this is pretty current, and I think it affects the most of us, was the Equifax, the U.S. Senate report, which was issued a little over 2 months ago. They did not have some of the monitoring tools that they should have had. They had them, but they let it expire. The hacker in that case was in their network for 78 days. So for most, it's very important to understand the nature of the landscape. These breaches, this ransomware, it's occurring very quickly. And if you haven't prepared your network, your people, your process around protecting your business against these types of threats, it'll be coming quicker than you know, and it's not like some of the natural disasters that you're able to get some sort of a warning. So it's very important for most industries to sort of understand what we're dealing with, and one of the last pieces that I'd probably mention regarding the playbook is not just the automation, but the enterprise that has been established through the hacking. There are businesses established for launching ransomware attacks, and this was actually presented about a week or so ago on 60 Minutes. If you have not seen it, it's a very good piece, and they actually refer to that as well, the ability to carry out a ransomware attack without any programming experience. So I'm going to jump to a quick poll, hopefully to get the audience started, and this will lead to some of the next piece, because not everybody's the same. So in jumping to that poll, the one question we have is, for your firm, what size is it, if you are a practicing attorney, what is the size of your firm? So we'll give about 30 or so seconds to respond to that. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds and show that for the audience. All right, Lisa, can you show that for the audience? All right, so not entirely surprising, except that I can't see it. So so you can all see that quick poll. A few that are not a law firm, which was expected. Solo practitioners. So why were we asking this? This is sort of for some self-reflection. So I mentioned in the presentation earlier the Verizon breach report, which was industry-wide. What you may or may not have seen recently was the ABA did their own survey of law firms, and in comparing the breach activity to law firms, and this is what's very important, I think, for the audience here to look at. So when you look at the first series of graphs, this going back to 2013, based on when the ABA was tracking this, the question that was relayed out to the audience was, what percentage on the survey had experienced an actual breach? And you can see that the trends are going up. It jumped from between 15 to 14%, upwards to 22, 23%. And this is over the series of the life, not just that year. So by their estimates, about 1 in 4 law firms have experienced the breach. And then they did a breakdown of that in terms of the breaches. How was this distribution? So if you're a solo practitioner, smaller firm, mid-sized firms, where are they seeing this? So you see 14%. So on the group of the 52 percent that are in here, you figure, I'm not sure the numbers, but you've got 14% solos. The one question that we have to ask the audience, if you haven't experienced this, if you go back to the Verizon part on discovery, over 60% of the breach reports industry-wide. It took months, but one of the hidden statistic is there are a number of firms that may have already been breached. They may already have someone on their network and they just don't know it. So when you answer that question in terms of the breach, ask yourselves, do you even know? Do you have the tools, or does your IT team have the tools to identify whether or not they've been breached? So that's a bit about the landscape today. We're going to go next into a bit of a checklist. So if some of this is new to you, some of the things that you might be able to look to both prepare for before, during, and after a breach, or to perhaps prevent a breach or ransomware attack at some point. We do have a checklist available, and again, as Lisa had mentioned, this presentation will be available to the attendees. So we'll move forward to the next piece. And this is again some of the trends industry-wide, not just legal. One of the notes is your firewall, your next-gen firewall. A single device alone is not going to fix the problem. There is no single bullet. You need layers. At that same token, and I think the challenge that most law firms or other unregulated industries have is they're not being told specifically what they need to purchase or what they need to do, because it's subject to their own interpretation of what they feel is best for their business. Plus, there's no shortage of opinion of what is better than the other. But you need to definitely have something in place. So next in here we have, and we're going to be building this out for the group here. We have a playbook. So this is somewhat what we model after for Secnap in the consulting that we do, in the conversations that we have with our customer, to try to piece together some sort of a plan. This is modeled after Gartner's approach. They call it stages of an adaptive security architecture. And I mentioned earlier, there's no shortage of opinions and there's no shortage of frameworks. You have groups from SANS, you have NIST, CSF, ISO, pretty much anybody under the sun, under some organization has a checklist, has a series of compliance checks of what they recommend for a best practice. And there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of the requirements are the same, because cybersecurity is the same regardless. And one of the trends that they all have is that it's a cyclical process. It has to be continuous. So in this next stage, we look at different stages that a group needs to look at to prepare, to predict, to prevent. So how do you prevent an attack from happening in the first place? How do you detect whether they've been in your network? And finally, if you have been breached, or if you suffer ransomware, what you should be doing afterwards. That information goes ahead and feeds back into a constant loop as you're evaluating your security measures and what you need to put in place. And again, it needs to be something adaptive. So the first stage, that top left quadrant, and these are questions that I think for legal, the reason most folks are probably listening in here now is you're being asked by your top clients, how are you protecting my data? Especially if you practice any form of commercial law, whether it be insurance defense or whether it's involved in financial, your clients want to ensure that you're keeping their data protected. And some law firms are, in the conversations we've had, are sort of getting caught as a deer in headlights. They don't necessarily know what their posture is. So there's certain questions that they have to ask themselves so they can respond and so that they can retain their client. And that seems to be the biggest concern amongst most of the law firms that we've spoken to. Again, that largest client wants to make sure that their data is being protected. And one of the first questions that comes in almost any form is a vulnerability management program. And I'll get to that into the next slide. And what is a vulnerability management program? So if you were living in South Florida and you have your home, the first thing the insurance provider is going to do is they're going to look at your home. They're going to ensure, do I have shutters or hurricane-proof windows? How is this home protected from the threat? Similar practice for cybersecurity, but it takes a couple other things into consideration. Cybersecurity is not just a technical problem, but it's also social. There's people, process, and technology that all need to work hand in hand to be able to solve the challenge. So when most companies look at a vulnerability management program, they want to make sure you're covering all the angles. And there are some of the common security assessments, several that we perform as well, where they look at your infrastructure, things such as a penetration test, right? So how easy can a hacker penetrate my network? How secure is my internal network? Most companies set up an internal network and assume that because it's behind a firewall and it's internal, they don't pay as close attention. But the challenge that they have, and what makes things easy for a hacker, is if they were able to get in via phishing or some other form, once they're behind that firewall, they have free access to do what they need to. And that's why that time frame for data exfiltration is 2 minutes in many cases. So security awareness. Security awareness is not just for the employees, but in many cases, the executives. You need to have executive buy-in to get the budget to put things in place. So again, clients are asking for, in many cases, for written proof. What is your vulnerability management program? If you haven't looked at this for a few years, it's probably time that you should be looking at it again to make sure you're protecting yourself against today's threats. Going back to that ABA Tech report, based on that survey, 28% of law firms reported they had done a full assessment. So there's an industry here that is under attack, and just over 1 in 4 have actually done an assessment or based on that survey. Something that we need to certainly look at either formally or informally. So next, a couple questions for you guys. These are typical questions that we see in some of the questionnaires. Oftentimes, these questionnaires are handed to an IT department or an outsourced IT department if there is one. Do you do vulnerability scanning? Do you do penetration testing? A lot of times, these questions are following some form of another compliance framework or regulatory body, because for credit card processing, for banking, for healthcare, these are requirements that need to be done on a continuous basis. Think of your cell phones. How often does your cell phone update? Because they uncovered a security vulnerability that needs to be patched. Oftentimes that gets overlooked in a lot of internal networks, and that's where the challenge comes. So they want to know that you're performing some of this. Does your company have a security awareness program? Is your security awareness program a security presentation that you send out to the employees and have them review once a year? Or does it have follow-up phishing exercise? How extensive is it, if there's one in place at all? And finally, do you have an incident response plan? Most companies want to know what's going to happen. So if you've got court coming up in a couple of days and you suffer ransomware and you no longer have access to your data, that's going to impact your ability to represent your client. So they want to know this, and their customers want to know this as well. So we'll do another quick poll, and the poll is regarding the questions that we just asked. So based on the questions that we asked in terms of what you've seen, part of this is self-reflection. Would you be ready to answer the actual question from a law firm's questionnaire? How many would you feel comfortable in answering some of these questions? And we'll give you a few moments to go ahead and check it. All right, we'll just give it a few more seconds. Let everybody go ahead and answer that. All right, we're going to go ahead and close it, and we'll go ahead and show the actual answer. So interesting numbers. So a high percentage of no. So assuming these were filled out properly, no being no, not familiar with it, not familiar with some of the questions, or not sure's. This is not uncommon. So this is, at least you know where to start. And for the not sure's, that's actually important. A not sure is probably about the same as a no. And the reason is, if you're not sure when you get this questions, you may need some time. How would you be able to respond to your client? So it's important to be able to know what you have to work with, so that you can talk about it. And we're going to get through some of this again later on through this presentation. So one of the first steps, going back to that quadrant, is to prepare a breach and print the plan. So a breach incident response, have it ready, because you don't know when it's going to go, and right now, folks don't know where to start. To use a couple quotes that I've probably gotten a bit redundant, you hear these all the time. It's not a matter of if, but when. And the second one I probably hear most often is there's two types of companies: those that know that they've been breached, and those who don't know that they've been breached. Um, and you can probably find another 30 quotes that relay similar information to relate the importance of cybersecurity these days, because it's not like it was years ago. So one of the first, in a pre-attack sense, one of the first things that we typically recommend, and almost all frameworks recommend, is to create some sort of incident response plan. Most regulated or most larger firms have sort of done this as a business. If you live in an area that has that's prone to natural disasters such as hurricanes here in South Florida, you've got some kind of an incident response plan. How are you going to maintain your practice if you need to evacuate? Again, with cybersecurity, it's not much different, but you need to know what you have to work with, and you also have to recognize, when a hurricane's coming, you don't know when ransomware is. So you need to have a plan coming in. One of the first recommendations that we put out when an incident response plan is put together is to have it printed. Number of times that customers have created a great plan, and they have it on some network share. But what happens if that network share were hit by ransomware? They no longer have access to their actual response plan. So it's good to keep a printed copy, but as I mentioned before, if you did an incident response plan and you have not looked at it for a couple of years, you should probably sit back down and take a look at it, because some of the things may have changed. Another thing to consider would be denial of service. It's another form of cybersecurity. What happens if all your systems are down? Another reason to make sure you go ahead and have it printed. One of the last pieces that we really address from an incident response plan involves backing up. Right. So many companies have great backups, but the challenge, if that backup is on the same LAN segment as the attack, I can't tell you enough times that the backups can and do get compromised as well. At some stage, they can get hit with the same form of ransomware. So you definitely want to make sure whoever's managing your IT keeps those separate for business continuity, and have an easy way to restore it. That way you can get back to business. One of the statistics that's come out, 43% of cyber attacks are on small businesses. So there's a reason for that, and part of that is they may not have the adequate protection. They may not have the monitoring in place to know that they've been hit, to prevent it. But also there's a lot of automation going on in terms of ransomware. The image of a hacker with a hoodie sitting on the other side is probably not as real as it is. A lot of this stuff is automated, and this is as a member of the FBI InfraGard, this is actually a piece that the FBI talks about, and one of the challenges that the U.S. government sees with nation states is that nation states have set up government-funded hacking organizations to automate a lot of this stuff. So you kind of see where it's coming from, and the biggest complaint that the government has is there's no remorse. They're going after anybody and everybody that has the vulnerability, and including business. So that's a debate for politics. We'll have that for another time. So next on that is we refer to the culture, either cyber hygiene or the culture of cybersecurity. I mentioned this earlier in the presentation. There are many businesses that may have a incident response plan. For those that answered yes, how quickly can you find it? And how well do you know what the business policies are regarding software that you should use? Most businesses, large businesses, have certain policies in place. Many don't know it. Many don't necessarily have that culture of being able to identify, for example, a phishing email. So there's a couple things that you should be looking at. When I get to that top right quadrant, and I'll get into that again later, we look at the technology. I mentioned earlier in that unified kill chain where you had all those components. Pretty much every stage of an attack has a vector, has a path in, and has some form of a defense. And that's what makes cybersecurity challenging, is that you need all these layers and all of this different technology, whether it be email security, encryption. So they all serve some sort of a function to potentially block the loss of data. They also have an inherent weakness, just like Superman has his kryptonite. There are things that a firewall can't do for you. A firewall serves as a door because you still need your traffic coming in, and it's those applications that you do use that sometimes are the path in for a compromise. And if you do have this technology deployed in your environment, one of the things that you need to look at is, are they updated regularly? So that's one of the reasons why so many companies have licensing involved, is to be able to provide you patches, to provide you updates, because they're not perfect. And they find new problems every couple months. So you want to update it to be able to protect yourselves against the newer threats. Regardless of the updating, if you've got a system, a firewall that you've been using for 3 years, you can assume the effectiveness is not quite there anymore. It might have been 95% effective, now we're 85%, or some lower number, because things have changed. So if you got a firewall that's 3 or 4 years old, you might want to start looking at it, because again, things change, and you need that second layer, because the assumption that you need to take from a security perspective is that one of the vectors, one of your technology pieces is going to fail. We talk about it's not a matter of if but when. There is going to be something that's going to get through at some stage. One example, which goes back to security awareness. So the question for the audience is, if you look at this sign on from Chrome, this notification. If we're all on Google, we've all seen this. You log in from a new computer. Some of these phishing emails are very hard to detect, even more so on your mobile device. I've actually seen this before. You see these emails. They're easier to find, but there are things that you can look for. So the question for self-reflection here is: would you have fallen for this? This is in fact a test phish email that was sent out during security awareness, and it starts from the top on day one, right? So you need to get the executives on board. Oftentimes they don't. In some of the conversations that I have, they're not aware of the security problems, because they're in their own world. So you need to get the buy-in so that they can enforce it and reinforce it all the way to the bottom. And cyber awareness serves as that second layer. If you have an educated workforce that's able to decipher a phished email that made it through your email security and not click on it, you're ahead of the game, because that's your second level of protection. So we'll get to the next page. So where are we at, just as a recap, as we're running through this? So your top left, you want to pre-attack, you want to plan, you want to predict, you want to understand your business so that you can put some measures in place. You want to plan for a breach, know your posture, implement some of the technology that is based on your business and what you need. Almost everybody needs an email. You need antivirus. Those are all requirements. If you don't have that, you'll be breached within seconds. But you need that additional layer of protection. The cyber awareness, multi-factor. I didn't get into this. We can do that in a later presentation. Very effective. Almost all banking systems today require that if you're going to log into your bank. A very important measure, but the software needs to be capable of supporting that as well. So I mentioned earlier, I was going to talk about alert monitoring. And a term that we refer to in the industry as alert fatigue. We're going to go into that a little more, so you understand, I guess, what the security side is dealing with in terms of monitoring. Again, there is no such thing as a set it and forget it mentality for security. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses do that. They purchase a next generation firewall or whatever technology they were influenced on purchasing, but there's little to no monitoring of it. So it remains unchecked. The logs aren't reviewed, and things get through. And the reason a lot of the guidances are somewhat general is because not every business can afford the level of protection that Bank of America is putting in. So there's some understanding. So understanding your business, should you be monitoring these logs 24/7? And there are some cases, there are systems in place. There are folks that are reviewing these logs on a real time. For perspective, a business with maybe a few hundred endpoints. When I say endpoint, I mean workstations or servers, actual devices that are in the network. Maybe about 100 or so. Depending on what you're monitoring or reviewing the logs, that generates about 1 GB of logs per day. And those logs are very small in size. So there's a lot of data being reviewed on a real basis. And a lot of that is noise. So the alert fatigue that gets referred to in the security community is that engineer that's spending a lot of time on nonsense. And that a lot of that, there's a lot of tuning that goes into that. One of the other challenges that we have in the business is lack of resources. So you might have seen cybersecurity in general. There's definitely a lot of interest. There's an overwhelming demand for security analysts, security engineers throughout. It's one of the few industries that has 0% negative unemployment. So again, on the monitoring side, definitely something that's required in many cases, but is definitely a challenge for most businesses in terms of the affordability, in terms of what's right for your business, and that's something that's a judgment call for most. Now, again, I referred to a lot of these frameworks, your payment card industry, which is the credit cards, your PCI, your NIST, your CSF, all of these frameworks that have these questions. And what a lot of them do miss is dark web monitoring. And this is something that is very, very, very trendy now, very, very popular. It's a very good indicator, and it does a couple things. It helps achieve buy-in. We've seen some executives, when you show results of the dark web, that their credentials were out there and their password was available in the dark web. You start to get that buy-in. And it does serve a very important technical need. It's not much different to certain respects than what you see from the credit industries of providing your credit monitoring for individuals. But for a business, this is the same sort of services, but applying towards that business. So we'll get into a little bit of dark web if you haven't been familiar. So going back 20 or so years with Google and Yahoo and all the search engines, a lot of these websites are indexed that makes them searchable. The deep web and the dark web, as many refer to it, are the resources and the sites and the wikis that are available but aren't indexed. They're not searchable. You have to know exactly where to find them, how to find them, oftentimes using a system called Tor to get into this network of the dark web. Not for the faint of heart. I wouldn't recommend exploration in this space for the general consumer, because this is a system that gets monitored by the feds, because it's typically where a lot of the criminal activity occurs. Your child pornography, your human trafficking, your selling of personal information. So you got to be very careful. But there are services that have been put into place to help crawl through some of this to try to uncover, both from past breaches that have been reported and through some of these message boards to see what they can uncover. And there are services available to go ahead and see if your credentials have been used. As an example, a couple of years ago, I think probably a lot of us are on LinkedIn. LinkedIn suffered a breach. LinkedIn was not encrypting passwords. So many of us had usernames and passwords from LinkedIn that were made available essentially to the community as a whole. Was human nature as far as password management. Most individuals try to find passwords they can remember. They recycle passwords. So the importance of dark web is to uncover what you have out there to see if your credentials have been compromised. One of the first things, if a new hit was put out there with your information, one of the first things you want to do is obviously change your passwords. Also need to keep in mind that based on some of the surveys that were put out there, a lot of individuals actually share passwords between their private and their public. So going back to the LinkedIn example, If you used LinkedIn for your private, or if you used your private information, your private email for LinkedIn, and it was compromised, guess what? They know where you're working. So it's not too hard to find your work email and leverage the password that they were able to get from LinkedIn to start getting into your personal systems. So it is, dark web is, again, it's a very scary place. So some of the things that point out, and a very high statistic, which is what makes this important. Statistic: 81% of hacking related breaches leverage either stolen and or weak passwords. Going back to that unified kill chain, once they're able to gain access into a network, they'll do password spraying. They'll do what they can to see if they can escalate their privileges to gain access to newer systems. And oftentimes, it's very easy to look at passwords and just try what you find on the dark web if they're able to use that. So dark web monitoring is something, again, that's not referenced in a lot of the questionnaires, but it's a great tool to have. And if you would like to learn more, or to get a dark web search done on your business, we'd be happy to do that as well. So there's some more information that you can find on the dark web, www.secnap.com/dark web. And we're coming towards the end here. We're just at the last stage, and this is a couple of housekeeping or business items for most business. When you review your business or your home property, you're going to have insurance. Cyber liability insurance, based on the surveys, is I think it was 11% of businesses had cyber liability. Now it's close to the upper 20%. So fortunately, most businesses are now taking a cyber liability policy to cover that incident, because the breach recovery can be in the millions of dollars. One of the things that you might want to look at, however, is the policy itself. Some of these policies may be outdated. Some of these policies that may not cover modern day attacks, such as phishing, social engineering, or state-sponsored actions. If you do not have a cyber liability policy, I'd recommend you look into it. But also, even if you have one, you might want to give it a close read to see if there are exceptions or gaps in coverages, because there has been case law now where ransomware occurred, there was business downtime as a result, but the policy did not pay out because there was an exception based on the type of attack. Using Florida as an example with hurricanes, this would be, I have windows, I claim I have shutters, but I didn't really have the shutters installed. There are cases where you might not get insurance because you did not put the adequate protections in, or it was not covered. So here's where we're at again on that. So we talked to the first two stages, and again, cyber liability is going to be coming in. Oh, I jumped around in the last piece. Let me go back to that so they can see it. So on the detection side, the monitoring side, dark web monitoring and the cyber liability policy. There are other solutions put in place, which we're not going to get into in this presentation, but happy to at a later, such as your intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. That's actually a key area for us here and for most industries as well. Now we should be wrapping it up. So in addition to the cyber liability, one last thing that we definitely recommend is to talk to a cyber consultant, if not Secnap, anybody that has a level of experience and expertise to help with an incident response. If you don't have a plan, if you don't know your posture, it would be a good time to check with your IT team, or in some cases, a third party. A lot of firms today have a bit of a challenge in allowing their IT group or their outsourced IT group to also be performing a security audit on what they've done, because they're always going to pass the security audit of their own based on their skill set. Sometimes it's good to have a different perspective to find things that they may not have found. And in fact, most architectures today, most compliance requirements want to have that separation to make sure that you're looking at it from a different set of eyes. And in some cases, you even rotate it. So last, a bit about myself and Secnap, and then I guess we'll close it out for questions. Why are we delivering this presentation? So our background was actually in research and development, and we were established in 2001. We formed the company and then quickly moved into security as a service, leveraging our patent. Our patent is in the intrusion detection, intrusion prevention space. And we've been doing it since 2001 for a number of customers, from your smaller businesses to up to Fortune 500. And Lisa, I think we're wrapping it up. I'm just going to bring it home with this last slide. So this is sort of some of the areas that we talked through, areas to consider. Again, the response service, the cyber liability, incomplete. So this provides some sort of a playbook that I believe that the law firms represented on this call should be able to look at and do some research, or if they've got questions, we'd be happy to help. Lisa, if you wouldn't mind, we can turn it over to any questions if there are any.
Okay. All right. So now is your chance, everybody, to on the little control panel that you have on your screen, under the question section, if you have any questions about what you just saw, you can feel free to type those questions in there. But actually, Rick, I have a few questions, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. You had mentioned before about different types of quote unquote breaches. And I know you talked a little bit about phishing, how those are those emails that try to lure you into signing into your account so that, you know, people can get your information that way. But can you talk a little bit about what ransomware is and what denial of service is?
Certainly. So ransomware is actually something that came on a couple of years ago. And it's pretty nasty as far as a philosophy. So think of it as a smash and grab, right? So you've got your educated hacker out there that's seeking data. If I were to go back up to this slide, this is going to help explain it, right? So what are their objectives? In your neighborhood, you might have at 2 o'clock in the morning, you might have folks checking your car and going for something quick, opening the door, taking what's in the car, or you might have more sophisticated burglar trying to break into your home. So with ransomware, what they're doing is they're compromising one system in your environment and dropping a worm or a Trojan, and they're encrypting your data. So what they're doing is they're holding your private information that you need to run your business, encrypting that, and then it goes back to notification. You don't know that they've done that in many cases until you see your files encrypted, or you get the notification letting you know, hey, I've got your files hostage. If you want to buy the encryption key so you can regain it, pay me $50,000. And this is something, and the 60 Minutes report that I had put out there was actually referring to ransomware quite extensively. This is a problem that most municipalities, most hospitals are facing with, because it's not just law firms. Imagine a hospital. So you may have heard things of WannaCry and some of the other ones. Imagine a hospital where they have patient information, they encrypt the information. That hospital that has been digital for some years now has to resort back to paper. So they don't know what your medications are. They have no clue. And in law, I'm sure you've got some information that is important to your actual day-to-day or the cases that you're currently working on. This is where backup is important. Some of the solutions for ransomware are let's just find what's been infected, let's just wipe it clean and roll back to our backup. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And City of Atlanta took a choice of not paying a $50,000 ransom, but spending $2.6 million as of my last check to just go ahead and basically redo their whole network. In many cases, some data is lost forever. So ransomware is a particularly nasty strain of cybersecurity to look at. I'm hoping I answered your question and didn't ramble.
No, definitely. We do have a few other questions that popped up. One
Sure.
is, what is your opinion on using online password generators?
So like LastPass and some of the other that actually store. That's a very effective. Those are very effective. They actually create a very complex passwords, and there are different in the industry, there's different views on that themselves, because even LastPass as an entity has been breached. But what they claim is that they have done a really good level of encryption. So even if they get breached, you're still somewhat protected. You know, some process is better than nothing. So LastPass or RSA or any of those are very effective. When I say RSA, I mean multi-factor authentication. So there are some companies that aren't as worried about passwords, because you need a second form of verification to gain access to some systems. But that system has to support multi-factor authentication. That's where you're trying to log in and then you wait for the text to validate you are who you are. So yes, they are effective. I know a number of folks who rely on them extensively, but that in of itself is not perfect. And one of the fears from a security perspective is, what if they get compromised? Not only do they have one of your systems, but they have all of your passwords. So that's a debate that still goes on within the industry.
Oh, wow. Okay. This is actually interesting. So another question rolled in. Credit bureaus are selling dark web analysis as an inducement to subscribe to their credit report monitoring service. What do you think of this?
So on the personal side, there's a debate on that. So, some of the experts, when it comes to your personal credit, when you have the breach from Equifax, the assumption is your information's out there. All of our information is out there. So change your password if you haven't done it. So the assumption is that, and there's a site on the personal side to actually help you at your level. There's Have I Been Pod or something like that. It's not a service and it's not 100%. It's Have I P. I can get back to you later. But yes, they are trying to get on the credit monitoring, but there are ways to just freeze your credit on the personal side as well. So it's another debate. Every it's a flip of a coin for some folks.
Okay, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for answering. All right. It seems as if we have covered all the questions for today. Rick, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. It was very informative.
My pleasure, and hope this information helps the audience. And I guess you'll be sending the presentation out. If anybody has any questions, feel free as a follow-up. If there's anything additional they want to talk about, I'd be happy to exchange some dialogue.
All right, awesome. Just as a reminder again, if you joined us late, this webinar will be recorded and it will be sent to all the registrants tomorrow via email. And you'll also receive the slides as well. And don't forget to take advantage of your one-time dark web scan at secnap.com/dark web. We'll send all this information in the recap email tomorrow. Rick, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Goodbye, everybody.